Speaking of issues that need to be addressed, this one I was completely unaware of. The American Bar Association, looking at an article here from Joy Pullman, deeply affects the U.S. lawyer pipeline and licensing system, accrediting law schools, rating judges, and weaponizing lawyer discipline. It's rabid leftism, says this Federalist article, means the ABA systematically ratchets the entire U.S. legal system against the U.S. Constitution. Lawyer extraordinaire Jeff O'Brien. Is that true?
Yeah, unfortunately. Thanks for having me on. Full disclosure, yes, I'm a member of the ABA, but I do it for the articles. They do put out some good publications for the profession. But
hey, Jeff, real quick, that excuse sounds a little bit like, an individual back in the day saying, yeah, I get Playboy magazine, but I just get it for the stereo ads.
So, but I do agree. I read the article. I do agree that I think the ABA has too much influence on a lot of different things. I mean, they're a voluntary organization, right? You are not required as being a lawyer to be a member of the ABA. So as a result, you have the membership is skewed in a certain way. I think there's an implication by their name that they're somehow have more influence than they should, or that they are somehow more of kind of a neutral arbiter.
I certainly thought that.
Yeah, right. You hear this at that level about the ABA and then the Conservative Federalist Society. Well, that implies somehow that the ABA is made up of a broader constituency when really it isn't. And to some extent too, John, the Minnesota State Bar Association is a similar structure. It's a voluntary organization. I'm part of two bar associations, both in Wisconsin and South Dakota, that are mandatory, and they're what they call integrated. So the Bar Association actually does have a role in regulating the profession. What these organizations are, they're just trade groups. They're just societies with members of the profession. I think at the federal level, with the judicial appointments, yeah, I agree. I don't think having the ABA bless judicial candidates at any level doesn't make any sense for constitutional conservatives. I think, if I recall right, during the first Trump presidency, he went off of a list that had been created by the Federalist Society to select judges, both not only at the Supreme Court level but Court of Appeals and the district court. And I think that's a good practice. So we have freedom of association in this country. The ABA is just fine to exist, and lawyers can join it for the reasons that they want to. But I think giving them more credit, such as having them bless law schools, things like that. I mean, there are state organizations that regulate the profession of the practice of law, and I think that those state organizations are just as capable of handling the regulation of the profession all the way down to the law schools in the state level. I don't think the ABA needs to have that kind of involvement.
So is it because of what you mentioned before and what I kind of assumed, just in terms of the way that people sort of examine the American Bar Association and the perceived power that it yields, that they end up taking advantage of? Like when it talks in the article about ditching the American Bar Association, and towards the end of the piece, talking with lawyer extraordinaire Jeff O'Brien, it says the state legislatures need to demand that their law schools be accredited by an entity committed to constitutional jurisprudence. So what would it mean to separate and ditch the American Bar Association or the Minnesota Bar? Would there need to be something that replaced it in what it does?
I really don't think so, John, because, let's take an example of the Minnesota level. You have the Supreme Court and various organizations, the Office of Lawyer Professional Responsibility, the Board of Judicial Standards. There's all these state authorized, state-sanctioned organizations that handle administering the bar exam, swearing in new attorneys, you're getting your continuing education, making sure that you're doing your continuing education credits, all of those things. You can't tell me that those same organizations can't also decide what the curriculum is at the 3 law schools in the state are, right? I mean, this is how it works next door in Wisconsin. Again, full disclosure, I'm a member of the Board of Governors over there. And the State Bar of Wisconsin actually has an active role in regulating the profession, including the fact that, if you graduate from one of the 2 law schools there, you don't take a bar exam. And they've made that decision that the education that's being provided at those schools is sufficient to qualify you to practice law in the state of Wisconsin. That's a state organization that's making that determination. There's no reason that every other state can't do the same thing.
In the 1980s, again, working off this piece from Joy Pullman, it says Republicans began to suspect that the American Bar Association was leaking constitutional jurist names to feed doing nothing with my fingers borking campaigns that ratcheted America's judiciary against the Constitution. The George W. Bush, first Trump, and Biden administrations thus ended ABA's pre-clearance for nominees, but foolishly continued to let the ABA interview and testify about nominees. And I point this out, Jeff, because this is clearly something that we've been dealing with for a while that maybe now we have a chance to address. I wonder how the Trump administration or at the local level would you go about addressing this particular issue to get voters up to speed on what the problem here is? Because like I said, I saw this piece and I was completely unaware that there was even an issue relating to the influence that the American Bar Association had until I read this article.
Yeah, I think one of the arguments that the article makes is that the Republican states should just start ignoring them. And I think part of that starts with those, states taking a stand and maybe coming up with a different process for their, overseeing their law schools. The problem is, if you want somebody wants to attend an ABA accredited law school, that gets to be a big thing, right? It just they're so ingrained and institutionalized. I think that in some of those points it may be not ripe right now to do anything. Maybe be too far gone to do anything in terms of that aspect. But when it comes to the judicial appointments, it just takes a president from just basically saying, I don't care what you say. I mean, this is the ABA, and if you look in that article, they posted a link to a tweet that the ABA put out, and I think this was after there were people that were criticizing some of these district court judges that were striking down executive orders or ordering Doge to allow for payments to be made across the world, and there were criticisms of judges. So the ABA was upset with people criticizing the judges, but they weren't upset for the judicial branch interfering with the executive branch. So that's the kind of examples of where they have misplaced priorities in terms of our constitutional order.
I want to play a talkback from the iHeartRadio app, talking with lawyer extraordinaire Jeff O'Brien from Andy, and I think it might actually speak to sort of the confusion that people have with what the American Bar Association does. But I'll let you decide. Here you go.
Good morning, Jon. Regarding the American Bar Association, I guess I always assumed, yes, if somebody was disbarred, they could no longer be an attorney. Is that correct?
Yeah, so what do you say to that question there, Jeff O'Brien?
Well, when you talk about being disbarred, the bar is the bar of each state. So
that's what I thought.
For example, I'm licensed in 5 states. I've been admitted to 5 different state bars. So to be disbarred means you are sanctioned or you are precluded from the practice of law by whatever the governing body or the licensing authority is over that particular bar. The ABA has no say in that.
That's what I thought. See, that's what I thought. And I think that speaks to the confusion that people have. They assume that if you're disbarred, that it's the American Bar Association that's disbarring you, when the reality is no, that is something completely separate from what you as a lawyer end up belonging to. And again, I honestly, I wouldn't have known that either prior to our conversation this morning, Jeff O'Brien.
Yep.
Let's go here. I know that you've been heavily involved relating to the cannabis industry. There was a really interesting piece earlier this week that I shared regarding the burdensome regulations that some, small private business entrepreneurs who want to sell the recreational marijuana are very, very concerned about. I have a story here, though. New program started to support Minnesota's legal cannabis industry. The Can Navigate, offering up $2 million in competitively awarded grants to community-based entrepreneurial support and organizations with the cannabis regulatory experts to help individuals navigate the regulatory structure of operating a business to sell legal marijuana. Also, Can Startup, that's going to award $6 million in grants to nonprofit leaders to fund loans to new cannabis micro businesses supporting job creation. Is there anything else you'd like to add to the recent moves related to the recreational cannabis movement that's been taking place?
Well, I will say this, and I was just at an event a couple weeks ago and talking with some folks, and I think there's kind of a consensus on this. The biggest thing that the state could do to help this emerging industry is for the governor to get off his media tour and come home and appoint a permanent director of the Office of Cannabis Management. We are now on our third interim director. They are borrowing staff from other agencies. They aren't ready for prime time to launch a heavily regulated industry. We're working with a lot of people that are, putting in their applications, spending a lot of time, spending a lot of money with us, getting corporate structures together, getting financing, doing all these things, and the state still continues to have proposed rules and temporary staff, and they don't seem to be they're so concerned about making sure that the right groups, don't get licenses, and they're not paying attention. They're not taking it seriously enough that we're trying to launch this industry. So I really wish that the governor and his administration would take this more seriously, because otherwise we're going to end up in the same boat as some of the other states that have had a failure to launch.
Lawyer extraordinaire Jeff O'Brien, thanks for the time this morning, my friend. We'll talk to you again real soon.
Thanks, John.